And the idea of a force potentially based, I guess, on GCC, what have you, to be more proactive in the region, replacing US and Western forces, it's stunningly contentious for domestic populations and indeed, of course, for regional stability.
Absolutely, Steve. And I think this really does speak to bigger questions about the Trump administration, the White House really having an understanding of what's happening in Syria with regards to this Sunni-Shia divide, and certainly in terms of what happens next with Bashar al-Assad and how contentious it is when we talk about more broadly this, what has been described to me by various Sunni leaders in the region as a Shia crescent, which is, essentially extending out of Tehran and via Damascus and into Lebanon as well. So a lot of questions there about how that would actually ever happen, how it would work, and politically. And frankly, when you talk about increasing the economic spend by countries like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, I mean, these are countries that are already overextended in Yemen, certainly Saudi Arabia itself. Certainly the Egyptians don't really have any troops to spare. I mean, they're really working on securing their country in the Sinai, and the questions over when the conflict in Yemen will end. I mean, the idea that they're going to actually be expending more resources to help, bring this Syrian conflict to a close. I mean, if this had been a question several years ago, they might have put that on the table in a real way. Certainly if they had thought that President Obama would move beyond that red line, that he would actually do something in Syria, if they thought, that this would actually be an opportunity to take Bashar al-Assad out of power, I think that you would have seen much more willingness on the part of certainly the Gulf Arab allies to expend resources, not just human resources in terms of putting, a force together, but of course also economic resources as well. But as we've come so far along on this path of really not seeing any real conclusion in sight in this Syrian conflict, I think it's less and less likely that you'll get them to come to the table, whether it be militarily or economically in any real way. And then, of course, the more broad question coming up, over the next year or so is, as this conflict in Syria comes to a close, who's going to rebuild there, guys?
Hadley, rebuilding we'll save for another conversation if we may, but the thought of Saudi troops, which are embroiled, of course, in a dispute in Yemen anyway, Saudi troops being on one side and potentially Russian forces being on another side as well. Now, given the fact that on a different level, Mr. Novak and His Excellency Al-Fallah as well are very, very close as well when it comes to energy policy, and we're going to see another endorsement of that, we think, later in the week as well. It seems almost inconceivable that you can have allies on a diplomatic front on one side and yet potential foes in the theatre of operations in Syria.
Absolutely, Steve. I mean, at the end of the day, the question does really become and really speak to what audience Mr. Trump was talking to when he was making these suggestions, making these comments. Because at the end of the day, if you understand anything about the politics of this region, the very idea that after, as you say, all of that economic diplomacy has been done between a country like Saudi Arabia and Russia, for example, the UAE as well, why in the world they would ever want to get involved in that kind of way in Syria at this point, it just doesn't seem very likely, does it?
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.